Today, I want to talk about one of the reasons why we do this healing, why we do this work. And it can be fairly obvious to most people why we do this work, and then it can be not as obvious to others. So, one of the reasons that we do this work is because we end up passing on our wounds to our kids. We're talking about why we do this healing work, and there are multiple reasons, but one of the main reasons why we put in the time and effort to do this healing work is because the wounds that we don't heal, we pass on. The wounds that we ignore and neglect are wounds that pop up somewhere else. Usually in our kids, usually in their patterns, usually in their relationships. And so if we are not doing our work, we are going to see that reflected back to us in the relationships of our kids. And kids end up mirroring the dynamics that feel comfortable for them. And comfortable and pleasant are not the same thing. When I say comfortable, I mean familiar, and children will repeat the familiar dynamics that they grew up in. So if you have a home that is full of conflict, whether or not your kids like that, their relationships are going to reflect that when they grow up. If your relationship dynamic in the home is full of shame, their life is going to reflect that. If the environment in your home is full of joy and connection and emotional vulnerability, they are going to repeat that pattern. And children are not going to do what we say rather than what we do. They are going to find what is comfortable and what is familiar. So one of the reasons it's so important, one of the main reasons it's really important to heal our own wounds and to navigate our relationships well in the home is because we want our children we want to feel happy and proud if our children mirror our family dynamic. And if you can look in your home and look at your partner and look at the way that you relate to yourself and not be proud of your children repeating those same cycles, repeating those same types of relationships, we've got work to do. If you look at your relationship to yourself and you don't want your kids to have that, you've got work to do, because they will. Your thinking patterns, whether or not you realize it, they get passed on. The way that you talk about yourself, the way that you talk about others, the judgment that you have for others, whether or not you realize it, even if you're not directing it toward your children, they will pick that up. They will view the world through that lens and view themselves through that lens. So how does this happen? I'm going to share a story of something that happened recently. And I just had this moment of sadness for my child self. And it's applicable to this topic. And, a lot of my client sessions reflected the same topic this week as well. So in this, the relationship pattern or the family pattern that was repeated was shame. So when I was a child in my family growing up, there was a lot of judgment. And I jokingly said that if judgment was an Olympic sport, we would have gotten the gold. We were so adept at judging others. We were so able to pick apart, what others were doing, where they were from, all of this stuff. And it was really ugly. It was really sad. And judgment can feel really bad for the person on the receiving end of that, but it also feels really bad for the person who is on the giving end of that. And I've worked to heal this wound because I didn't want to pass on judgment to my kids. I didn't want to pass on that shame to my kids. So I've worked pretty hard on getting down to the bottom of where all of that judgment came from, where all of that shame came from. And there was a lot. And I was recently at a sporting event, and one of my family members, a really significant family member, made a comment about somebody else's body, and it was in a public setting. And that person couldn't hear them, but other people could, and I could. And I had this moment of sadness for everybody who was listening to that. I had this moment of sadness for myself. I had this moment of sadness for that person. And I remember thinking, gosh, my child self would have just joined in. My child self would have just joined in that disgust for that other person. Because that's how I knew how to cope. That's how I knew how to separate myself from the person being judged, because the judgment was so visceral. It was like pure disgust for this other person. And I know that my child brain would have made sense of that. It was like, oh, that feels really bad. I don't want that to be directed at me. So I can direct my disgust toward that person as well. And then that won't ever come to me, because I can see myself mirrored in that other person. And we all learn to cope with the situations that we're presented with. And so if we grew up in an environment of shame, and a lot of us did, I certainly did, we learn to put shame on others so that it's no longer on ourselves. And I had this just deep moment of grief for myself. And in reality, in that moment, I just didn't respond. And so this person, the significant person in my life, repeated the disgust statement about this other person. And I just didn't respond. I didn't have the language at that moment because I was processing something for my inner child. And I thought of how many times I had that same experience with other significant people in my life who were directing disgust or directing shame toward others. And I saw how sad that was. I saw how intense that was when it was directed at somebody else. And a part of my brain was like, I want to make sure that's never directed at me. So how do I make sure that's never directed at me? I can continue to direct shame. And this isn't a conscious process that we go through as kids. This is like instantaneous, like that feels bad. I want to make sure that never feels it. I want to make sure I never feel that way. So what do? We join in. And I am sure that this person in my life wouldn't want me to view myself the way that they were viewing this other person. I am sure that this person who was making this comment wasn't looking at, my 5-year-old self, my 7-year-old self, and saying, gosh, I hope Rebecca hates her and looks at herself with disgust the way I'm looking at this person with disgust. I am sure of that. But that's what happened anyway. And we are continuing to pass on our wounding to our children in the same way. We're not trying to. We're not actively hoping that our children have conflict ridden relationships. We're not hoping that our children see themselves poorly. We're not hoping that our children have bad self-esteem, But the way that we speak about ourselves and the way that we speak about others, the way that we communicate in our homes is written into their experience. It's coded into their bodies, into their thinking patterns. And there are so many moments where we are writing the story of our children's lives and we don't realize it. And we are giving them a future that's full of sadness or full of shame or full of conflict or full of aggression or whatever it is that is unhealed in us. And it is our job to do that healing so that we don't pass on those wounds, because we will. Some of it is literally written into our DNA. And so we'll have even more work to do, but a lot of it is written by what we model, by what we do, what we say, what we think, the looks on our faces. It's written into them. And so I guess this morning, I'm really just present with our need to heal ourselves, our need to do the work and to show up for ourselves and therefore show up for our kids so that we don't pass on the wounding that has hurt us so much. Sometimes people are more motivated by their own needs, and sometimes people are more motivated by their kids' needs. And I want to say to you that you deserve that healing. But even if you don't believe that that's true yet, your kids deserve better. Your kids deserve a future that's better than the one that you have. Your kids deserve a more healed version of themselves. Your kids deserve healthy relationships. Your kids deserve to see themselves in a good light, in an accurate light, in a healthy light. They deserve to see the world in that way. And so do you. You deserve that. You deserve to clear out some of that all of that societal junk that was attached to us about gender, about relationships, about mental health, about self-care. And this work that we do here is it's lifelong work, and that can feel kind of daunting. But it also changes generations. It changes generations beyond what we will ever see or understand. The work that we do in ourselves so that we don't pass on those wounds to our kids, the ripple effects are just farther than you'll ever know. You have a question in the chat. What did you end up saying to your loved one, or what do you wish you had said? Yeah. So I didn't end up saying anything, and I felt really sad about that. I still feel very sad about that. And that was the best I had in that moment. The best I had was no response. And so I'm sad that I wasn't able to show up for that other person, even though that other person didn't know that I would have been doing that for them. I did it in the way that I could by not joining in, by by allowing that comment to fall flat rather than to be received. So that's the way I was able to show up for that person. I wish I could have done more. And what I wish I would have said was, I wonder what it's like for them to know that there are people here thinking about their body, commenting on their body. I wish I would have said, oh, that's a really unkind thing to say. I'm sure they're doing their best with what they know how they know how to cope with life. Something to that effect. And I've thought about it multiple times, and those are the best things that I can come up with, but they still don't quite feel right. And maybe that's because I'm still navigating this wound and I'm still healing this wound. Sometimes while we're still navigating that wound, we have, like, we can't quite fully see it clearly. But that's probably, at this point, that's what I wish I would have said. Maybe in a couple weeks, I will have better language for that. So that's probably something I might say next time, but that's this iteration of my response. I also in that moment was struck for this person, the significant person in my life, because I was like, this is their view. This is their wounding at play. This is how they were taught to receive value. This is how they were taught to allow themselves to feel better by putting other people down. And I wondered how many times this person had other people speaking harshly to them about others and about themselves. And I think that that's why, I know that that's why I feel so strongly about this work in general, because we just keep passing down our wounds. We just keep hurting the people that we love the most. I am sure that this person's parents would be really sad about the lifelong effects they've had on my significant person's self-esteem. And I'm sure my significant person, this person who was there with me, would be very sad to know the impact of their statements on my view of self. And it just keeps getting passed down and passed down and passed down. And this work that we're doing here is just so profound. We are deciding that we're not passing it down anymore. We're deciding that it ends with us. We're deciding that we are worth it and that our kids are worth it. And there's something so magical about that. And if there were something I would leave you with, I guess it would be to start taking some inventory. What are the things that you have struggled with deeply? What are the things that have haunted you? What are the things that you have hated about the way you've lived your life? And do you want to see your children follow in those footsteps? Do you want to see those relationship patterns repeated in your kids' marriage and your kids' significant relationships? Do you want them to speak to their kids that way? Do you want them to navigate life with a partner who mirrors your own partner dynamic? Because they will. They will. And if you aren't satisfied with your kids living the life that you've had, with the wounds that you've had, you've got work to do. And it is going to be hard work, it is. But it will be the most rewarding work you could ever do. I promise you that. So I think I'm going to end on that. I think I'm going to end early today. But if I'm distracted by this plant that needs care. So I want to go trim that plant. But I also have just said what I wanted to say. I guess I just would say, what are the things, what are the wounds that you know you need to work on? What are the wounds that you know you need to heal so that you don't pass them down? So that you can be an instrument of healing in the world instead of an instrument of harm. You deserve that. And so do your loved ones. Okay, I will see you soon. So much love and care for you. You deserve gentleness and kindness on your journey. You deserve healing. And so do your kids. As always, reach out to me if you need help, if you're getting stuck. And I will see you soon. Have a good day.